Okay, let me try and help with this best I can. Um, Unfortunately, some of this is not really going to have a resolution at this point. And let me in case you don't know, or let me try to explain why. So let me start out by talking about F4SE and plugins. I know I've never really looked at the code. I know a little bit about from what I've read. I've never really talked to any of the developers of it. But if I were to do it myself, and a lot of times when I analyze something, I ask myself, what would I do? How would I solve the problem? And oftentimes you find out that people solve problems in very similar ways. Sometimes there's more creative ways than others, but generally it's the same process. The same things need to be done. It's just how those things are done, or the order in which they're done might be. They're going to be. Could be slightly. It more than likely will be different depending on the person doing it. Okay. So that being said, what you have is basically a game. Now I'm not talking about Steam, where they actually part of the DRM is to dynamically add a chunk of the game code when you run it. But outside of that, let's just talk about a program, an executable program. And it has been a long time since I've reverse engineered games. Very long time. I haven't done it recently. Maybe one day if I get the time. But I've kind of done that a long time ago, and I'm kind of chillaxing out on that stuff. Been there, done that. But what it does is it has to what they call hooking into. So basically, you've got an executable. It's a program, and when you can have source code that's compiled down into machine code. Those are bits and bytes, basically bytes or words. Could be any size. The old 8-bit systems, had 8-bit words to 64-bit words, and even greater. It'll be even higher in systems to come. But those basically tell a CPU what to do with all of these transistor arrays that exists in that chip. All those transistor arrays are organized in a way that they do certain things. Compare values, compare bits, things like that. So that's instruction code. And it's compiled out. So what F4SE has to do, or Reshade or anything like that, is it has to find a way to get itself inserted into that executable code, meaning that they're going to have to replace certain instructions in that executable when it's running. It's dynamic. You're going to have to replace that so that, let's say you've got an instruction that says, I'm going to jump and do this. You replace that with your address, which then does what you want it to do, and then at the end of that function, you have to go do what the original address did. So you're inserting a little a gate, a little thing that kind of gates out in a different direction, but then goes back to whatever it was supposed to do. So it hooks into it. And F4SE then loads other plugins to try to mitigate or provide a type of mitigation and a way to easily add features to a game, because very few people actually do the reverse engineering, and I would venture to say that it even requires maybe some inside information. I'm really big on being kind of honest and upfront rather than kind of beat around the bush. But it may have some of that may be involved, and that's perfectly fine and would be expected. People shouldn't try to hide that fact, because you're going to have something in order. You're going to have some information in order to do some things. You can reverse engineer it. So without that, you're going to have to reverse engineer the code. So you're going to basically need something that can step through the instructions, like a debugger, to where you can step through what's going on and literally see what the thing's doing. And it takes trial and error, and that takes an enormous amount of time. And when Fallout 4 first come out, they had done just that. So whether they had a little bit of inside info or whether they basically just had the experience in doing it, they had the script extender. Now from that, you had other people doing the same thing. They were reverse engineering the code. And this is true of anything. Reverse engineering is not necessarily a bad thing. It can provide a lot of insight, and it can further knowledge on how things are done. And I'm not really going to get into how companies want to protect their kind of their trade secrets, because everybody knows how to do something, and I'm sure if they've got a trade secret, somebody else knows the exact same thing. But that being said, so that's what they're doing. Okay. Now, when Bethesda went in and they recompiled Fallout 4, and it looks like it's still under a type of transition. So it looks like they're still trying to modify it a little bit. And I was thinking years ago, what they should do is have a completely different rendering engine. Don't build that into the game. Actually pull your rendering engine out, and therefore your game data can all be, like your plugins and things like that can be what formats the data into what the game engine needs. So therefore, if you're using for example, if you're using DirectX, then you want to format your records and create the structures, such as your meshes and things like that the game engine is going to use. Therefore, you simply plug in a new game engine, which has the conversion code in it, or you can have your own little conversion library. So you update your conversion library, you put in a new game engine, a new graphics engine, and the game stays the same. And therefore, the actual list manipulation, injections, things like that can all stay the same. That would be the way to do it. But anyways, back onto the next gen, the NG version, next gen version of Fallout 4. So when they recompiled it, it changed the addresses. Some probably stayed the same, but a lot of the addresses changed, which means that if you try to hook into the same address, there's no telling what instruction is at that address. It may not even be a call to a routine. It may be something that adds a value, because it's very positional inside that code. So they have to go through and reverse engineer that whole process. And what you saw, at least what I'm observing, what I'm actually seeing when I look at it, and I'm looking at things from a very, very external point of view. What you see very slow development, whereas you initially have the script extender by the team that does that type of reverse engineering and developing a script extender. And then you have people that start doing plugins, but then you have people that actually start creating their own kind of stuff that the script extender doesn't necessarily provide. So that's where you get the additional functionality. And they're looking at certain data structures and things like that. Now, once the code was recompiled under a new version, like I say, all those addresses changed. And they still haven't gotten everything reverse engineered or everything figured out. They may do it, they may not. It depends. It really depends on, whether they're motivated to do it. And if you notice, when it starts out, it's like a snowball effect. Everything starts out really slow, adding features. Then all of a sudden, it's snowballed to where you had all of these different script extender plugins popping in left and right, putting all kinds of new features in. Then all of a sudden, the code changes, and now you're back to that snowball effect where you start out with just a little tiny snowball in your hand, and it has to wait to build. So all of the people who develop these plugins, they have to wait until the addresses are that rediscovered, or they're relying on somebody else's code, whether it be an address library, things like that. They're relying on those to be done first. So everything is kind of in a wait status. Now, the biggest problem with that, I can tell you the biggest problem with that, and I'm sorry if this is long-winded, but the biggest problem with that is you have very few people that actually do what these particular groups do. Very few people do it. Which means that if they decide they're not going to do it, then it's not going to get done. And I'm not trying to push anything or use any type of manipulative idealism to try to get things the way I think it should be. But that's the general problem with it. when you have a very small group of people, and this very small group of people basically are the only ones who do this, then you are literally stuck until they decide to fix it. And they do have personal lives and things like that, and sometimes their reason for making plugins is just to see if they could do it. They didn't want to turn it into a job, and I completely understand that. But in that respect, in my opinion, what they should do is share the technology, share how they do it, so that way other people can pick up that ball and move it forward if they decide that is not what they want to do. That is kind of like how I code things, and that way anybody can see how to do it. Somebody can say, you know what, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen, I'm never doing that, or somebody say, oh, that's pretty cool, never thought of it. Because to me, that is how society and people and knowledge move forward. Is it doesn't stagnate on itself. It needs to move forward with new ideas. Okay, so anyways, all that being said, that's kind of like how the F4SE thing is. So when you see this, where it says unhandled, well, not the unhandled exception, but let's do this. You see where it says direct hit DLL? Okay, when it doesn't load, if it says no version data, that means that you are running a different version of the Fallout 4 executable than that plugin was meant for. So more than likely you are running an NG version of Fallout 4, and that is an OG version of direct hit. So that this DLL right here, this direct hit DLL, that is a plugin that is loaded by F4SE. And that plugin was compiled for probably 1.163 version of the 163 version, or the OG version of Fallout 4. So it won't load. The new script extender is not going to load that because it's not meant for the newer version of the program. Because when it tries to access addresses, they've changed, and it's more than likely going to completely cause a crash, or it could crash your graphic card. It's just a bad idea. So to me, the script extender author correctly, decided, no, I'm not going to allow this to load because it is not meant for the current version of Fallout 4. And it's the same for the interior nav mesh DLL. This is the same thing. If it comes up with this, anytime you see this right here, that means that F4SE didn't load it, which means it has no memory reference to the functions that it would have loaded into memory. That's what it does. It loads this DLL into memory, and then inside those memory, you have memory offsets to certain functions. Well, it didn't load it. So that means that this nav mesh cut is meant for an OG version of Fallout 4. And if you're running the NG version, it won't load because it's not meant to patch in or make its coding decisions, its logical decisions based on addresses that are the wrong addresses, so the data is going to be wrong. This right here came with, I noticed this too, this came with a, that right there came with, God, I can't think of the mod. Yeah, I won't look it up right now, but it came with, I want to say Excel. Give me a second. I want to say it was Excel, but don't quote me on it, because I don't know what it's called. Let's see. I think it came with Excel. Give me a second, just to make sure I'm not telling. It came with something. It came with the NG, maybe the NG version of Fallout. Let's see. Are we kind of? There we go. It's not that. Oh, I know what I did. I actually did this. I don't want to do that. Let's put this back. All right, let's save this back. I think it's buff out. I think it came with buff out. Let me see. Buff out. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this was included with buff out NG. So I'm not sure what it does. It looks like a Microsoft redistributable, and it didn't load it because whatever it is, it's not made for the NG version of Fallout 4. So I don't know. I've never looked at it. Let's see. Let's do this. I don't know if there's any information in the executable that will tell us anything about it. Let me see. Let's look at properties here. All right. So, in details, let's see what we got. Yeah, see, it's a Microsoft thing. I'm not sure why it's loading it or not loading it. It should, since it may not be tied. It might be tied to the NG version. So I'm assuming that that is loaded. Well, that's actually loaded by F4SE. So I'm not sure why it doesn't load that, because that would have nothing to do with the addresses, I wouldn't think, unless they're passing a certain address to that DLL to actually come, to display some result or to process some result. So that's what this means. So this came with, we figured this one out. This one came with buff out, and it's not being loaded. Now, Power Grid Tools, that's the one that tries to fix the linkage between the data structures, the powered objects. Again, that one is probably made for the OG version, not the NG version. So I'm assuming at this point, kind of a couple things from the testing that I've done. I'm kind of assuming that there are some engine level problems. And I believe that what I'm seeing is there's some engine level problems where objects aren't being fully initialized before they're rendered, because I've noticed that when I run into a new settlement, and this is not using SS2, so I don't think this is basically an SS2 problem per se. Maybe dumping too many new objects into the mix is causing it to trigger events that, because multi-threading, one of the things I've noticed, and I know this is kind of offshoot, but I want to throw this in there, multi-threading is an absolute pain to deal with, because things can run at, like, the application that I'm developing is multi-threaded, so almost everything is multi-threaded, and I guarantee you something is running that I didn't realize is going to interfere with something else, or it seems to work because one thread ran and another thread ran after it, and they're running at the same time, but the result that one thing created happened just before the second thread needed it. And you try to mitigate it to a certain degree, but it's very, very difficult to do because there's so many different things going on. So I think there's an engine level problem at that level, because I know that when I run into a settlement, I'm hitting invisible objects. So the collision for an object is somewhere else in the settlement. So it's like I'm hitting an invisible wall. But the actual object that needed the collision, I can run through. So when I actually go in and if I save the game in that settlement, so I immediately save it and reload it, that invisible object is gone, and the object that didn't have collision now has its collision back. So I'm assuming that to me sounds like a threading issue, to where the game is trying to do things on multiple threads to decrease the loading time. Because, I mean, just because somebody screams about something doesn't necessarily mean it has to be addressed. And I think that, everybody's talking about loading times, and I think Bethesda tried to do this multi-threading thing, but the arbitration, and it's like a race condition where, it seems to work, but then when you change the code a little bit, that actually changes how long a thread runs, and it changes the positional order, the timing in which threads look to each other, so that may cause a problem there. So I think it's that kind of issue. And another thing is, I think it's they haven't really reverse engineered the data to figure out exactly where things are. And the people that have done these tools may be off doing something else. They may be taking a trip. They may be doing some family stuff. It's kind of like, it's one of those bad, and I don't say it's a bad situation. That's not the correct way to put it. But it's one of those situations where a community becomes dependent on certain things, and then when those certain things are no longer there, it causes a problem. And people that develop things, and I know I'm kind of saying this, and I'm not trying to defend anything or strike anything down, but they're not necessarily bound to the community. But I do think that there is a certain responsibility. Once, like if for example, I drive around the city and I hand out free food to people, well, they're going to come to expect that. And I could literally say, well, I don't want to do this anymore. But if I've done it for so long, they trust me that I'm going to do this. So I need to let people know that this, I have to drive by and say, hey guys, I love doing this, but I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. I've got to go do some other things. Or, hey, I may be sitting on the curb with you waiting for somebody to bring me something to eat. It could be anything like that. But I think there's a certain responsibility, I think, that comes with those kind of positions to either inform people, to let them know that things are no longer available, or to let them know, what's going on. And I know they get aggravated when people constantly ask, because people always try different ways to try to manipulate another person into doing something. And most of those are pretty transparent. But to be honest, I do believe that there is a certain, not a complete, but a certain amount of responsibility that once you become dependent on something, then either you pass the torch on to somebody else and let them deal with it, or you basically say, I'm not doing this. Well, if you're not going to do it anymore, pass the torch to someone else, or educate or train people that other people you have backup, so you're not the only one doing it. Okay, so, and all that stuff being said, that's what you're looking at. I believe you're looking at, these are plugins that were meant for the OG version of Fallout 4, but you're running an NG version, and since very few people do these tools or update, they created these tools to begin with, we're going to have to wait to see if they're going to do it, or if it's scheduled to do. I know one of the developers went on a trip, so they'll be gone for a while. But it would have been nice to have trained somebody else to pick up that ball at least a little bit until they get back, or to communicate every now and then, maybe once a month, hey, this is what you need to do, make this change or something. So that's what you have there. Like I say, I haven't reverse engineered anything in a very long time. I've got so little time now to really do anything like that. I just don't have the time for it. But yeah, that's what that is. So with Sim Settlements 2, and then on the second part of that, and I know this is getting long, and I apologize. I do have a tendency to ramble on a lot about a lot of different things, but I do think that, and I've noticed things that are not necessarily Sim Settlements 2. Okay, because I've been doing I've done a lot of different playthroughs using things that modify objects in a workshop's space. I'm going to use that term like in quotes. It's space. So I've had robots that go through and will delete objects. So like it'll clean up. I think one was like a cleanup robot. But the problem was I had other things that were modifying objects as well. And eventually you will get a condition where all those are trying to modify objects. It is going to crash with a null reference. So I'm thinking that they build a list of the objects. So let's say that, you don't want to like say, you go into F4SE and say, all right, hey, I want you to give me a list of all workshop objects in this space. So let's say you're in Sanctuary. I want all the workshop objects in this space. And I'm just guessing now, I'm assuming that the mod believes itself to be the only owner of that list. So therefore, it processes that list as though it is the only owner. So it doesn't take into consideration that that list can be given to other scripts at the same time, or anytime in that process. Because remember, with scripts being event-driven, that means that these events can fire at any time, and they can fire in any order in any time. So before they act on something, they need to make sure the reference is valid. But I believe they're acting on it first, or an object got deleted, which deleted all of the substructures that it was using, and then because of that, the other script or code grabbed that list, looked at that item, and then it didn't check the substructures, such as like a material file or a material file value. And if that got deleted when it's about ready to get used, guess what? It's no longer there. So that's a mitigation issue between two threads. And I think when Bethesda wrote the scripting, they encountered this, and I think that's part of the reason why they dumb it down. And I hate the term dumbing it down, but they simplified it to a degree because I think they looked at it and said, hey, we don't want to put this kind of development time in here because this is going to complicate it. We want to get this out the door. And I get it, because you've got a development team that really, you had a great art team, a great tone team, if you want to call it that creates the mood, the environmental storytelling. They want to get that out there. They want people to enjoy what they've created. And you had a programming department that provided certain features. They simplified everything into the base features or base functions, and then they combine those functions together to try to make it look complicated. But again, it's the simplification without additional editing, so it doesn't really check to see what more complicated, or what when you combine those simplified features in a more complex feature, it doesn't stop to take a look at what that complex feature is trying to do. In other words, it didn't take a look at the interrelationship between the simplified functions. So, and that causes a problem, because then it just really janks out. But the AI is kind of interesting how they did it. Well, I don't want to ramble on, because I could literally ramble on for hours about all this. But yeah, so that's that. I believe that's an old gen version, and you're trying to do you're trying to use it in a new gen, the next gen version. I'll have to wait until they modify the code. Otherwise, there's not much you can do. All right. Hope that helps. And I know that probably was an answer you were looking for, but yeah, just hang in there, man. Crashes happen. I still get crashes from NG stuff, because that stuff's still under development, and it just takes some time to do it. So, good luck, and just don't get frustrated, and just have fun.